Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage podcast with Greg Gregory. Join us as Greg interviews powerful thought leaders and successful team and leadership experts from across the country on teamwork, leadership, and organizational culture. Now let's check in for this week's episode.
Welcome back to the Teamwork Advantage, a podcast with me, Greg Gregory, as your host. Today, we're fortunate enough to have on the Teamwork Advantage an All-American outside linebacker for Penn State University, where he earned his Bachelor's of Science in Health Policy Administration. He went on to play 10 seasons in the National Football League with Cincinnati, Chicago, and Detroit, as well as the Washington Redskins, where he started in Super Bowl 26. After retiring from pro football, he was the department head of the Emergency Registration Services at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, Virginia. Today, he currently serves as the executive director of the Professional Athletes Foundation, the charitable arm of the National Football League Players Association, where he works to ensure retiring players make a successful post-football transition. In addition to that, he still serves on the governing board for the Virginia Hospital Center. Andre Collins, welcome to the Teamwork Advantage. We're glad to have you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about, leadership and how to motivate folks.
Yeah, it's a challenge, especially in the times that we're dealing with today. So let's kind of go back a little bit. In playing football, you had to make the transition. And obviously that's a very difficult transition, going from a professional athlete in the limelight on the field to working in a leadership. What was the tough part for you when you made that transition into the private sector, if you will?
I think the toughest part when you're coming from sports is you don't really know your worth in the private sector. You know, you're so focused on game plans and the physical aspect of pro football. Now, certainly there's a lot that goes into preparing for a game, but it doesn't always translate to what happens in the, for lack of a better term, the general public's workforce,
Right.
The private sector. So, that transition was difficult. You don't know your worth, you don't know your value. So you're really starting from scratch. And for someone like myself, where I played a long time, you almost feel like you're discounted those 10 years that you played pro sports while your colleagues had already gotten started, fresh after college. So as a 32-year-old man starting my professional career, I really felt like I was literally 10 years behind. So that was probably the toughest part. And then certainly missing my teammates, missing the locker room, showing up in your pajamas to start the workday. You don't get to do that in the real world. So.
Well, I don't know. Lately, we've been able to do that working from home.
Well, that's true. But all those things were quite the adjustment for me. Certainly, probably for most of my teammates over those years.
And it's really powerful because the average career time for an NFL football player is not that long. As you mentioned, you played 10 years, and that's considered a long time, especially in a defensive position. So do you think players that have played a shorter time have an easier transition, or those who played longer have an easier transition?
That's something I've really thought about over the years, and something in the last few years that we've really started to study, really trying to understand how much the game has impacted a former player's life and how they're able to move through life successfully. And I would honestly say that, the shorter your career, the less football has impacted your life. So I think players that have played a long time, and I'm not talking about the superstar players like the Troy Aikmans or those types that can step out of, their uniform and into the broadcast booth. But for a regular guy that's played a long time, it really does set him back a little bit as he tries to move through, as opposed to a guy that maybe played 1 or 2 seasons.
Exactly. And it's probably comparable in some ways, not completely, to military personnel when they first come out of the military, trying to find their worth in fitting into a position. I think anytime there's a major transition, that's a challenge.
Yeah, I've found over the years, there are a lot of similarities between former NFL players or former professional athletes and guys that have transitioned from the military. And we, from time to time, we have programs together where we do try and lean on each other's experiences and, and talk about how that transition, that emotional transition has impacted us and how to move forward from that.
Yeah, that's got to be powerful for both sides of that equation. Now, as you got out of football, you were working at the Virginia Hospital Center and in leadership capacities. How does being a leader in the private sector differ from being a team member in a pro football setting?
I mean, it's very different. And for me, for that being my very first experience, and I'm forever grateful to Jim Cole for giving me that opportunity. I just happened to be a young guy in the right place, at the right time. And sometimes that's how leadership happens.
Mm-hmm.
I was working some third shift manager's job at first in the emergency registration department. My boss decided to leave for a number of reasons, and they were looking around for someone. And I was a guy wearing suits every day. I was getting there early and I was leaving late, and they looked around and they said, "Hey, why not him?" So I was kind of thrown into the fire, to manage, 27 or 28 employees. And, I felt like I was a little bit in, over my head, really, because I had never really managed people before.
Mm-hmm.
But, you can assume that it's very different than football, but there's always preparation in football, and there's always preparation on the job. There are always people that you need to inspire and motivate and kind of nudge a little bit. So I really tried to draw on some of those teaming experiences and that inspirational leadership style that so many of my coaches had over the years. And before we got on the call, we talked briefly about Coach Gibbs, but some of those inspirational styles, I think early on in my career, teaming and that trying to be an inspirational leader really carried me through until I learned more about leadership and understanding my own personal styles.
And that's a great transition, is understanding your style, because as we all know, there's lots of styles of leaders. We've have some that, the autocrat leader who sits there and barks orders. I sometimes in my workshops and keynote speeches talk about the authoritative leader being that compared to a drill sergeant in the Marine Corps. And I've asked people, what do they think of their drill sergeant on the third day of their basic training? And I've heard rather shocking answers. But I asked them, what do they think of that same person at graduation? And it's total respect and love for that situation. So their leadership style has to manifest. What is your natural leadership style? How do you adjust? How do you find things to do differently? Because let's face it, in the last 15 years, things have changed, not just with the coronavirus, but in general. So tell me a little bit about your leadership style.
And I think the key word in that phrasing that you put forth was natural. And I think I've learned over the years that you have to be yourself in your leadership style, and you have to be authentic. If you don't believe what you're saying, no one else is going to believe what you're saying, and no one's going to follow.
Exactly.
And I think, I took some coursework after college at Cornell University in the College of Industrial and Labor Relations. And I took this beautiful class on proactive leadership. And coming from football, I was always nervous about whether or not I was, being professional enough in my leadership approach. And, the professor in that class, he really validated how I felt, where he said, you have to say things the way that you say them. So if I were to characterize my leadership style, it's natural. I have to be 100% authentic. I'm a scholar and an athlete, and I can't always turn away from what I've learned in sports. So teaming is a part of that. So through teaming, I like to believe I'm an inspirational leader. And sometimes it's just telling someone, come on, you can do it, that gets them where they need to be. As a teamer, I always kind of employ this quality circle style of management. And certainly in the things that I do, it's not always fair to look at my staff and expect them to do everything. Sometimes I have to be willing to go down to where the most junior person sits and kind of do some of that work on a regular basis. Now, there are times when I need to be above that and working on, organizational governance, but I'm not afraid to do what my team does. So, we come together. I try and let my team own what we do. I try and let them step up as I try and help them develop into their own kind of leader, and let them give important presentations and things. I don't always feel like I have to be the person to do that. So it's really built on that. It's the teaming, it's the inspirational, motivation. It's that quality circle, approach where you try and develop your team and kind of let them own, what they're working on.
So when you've got somebody who's not, I don't know, the term maybe is carrying their own weight, not doing things, not hitting it, what are some ideas and things that you might be able to share that you have used to help bring that person along, get them more into the team spirit? What have you been able to do?
Yeah, and you have to know people, and sometimes it's just a frank conversation. Because I like everyone that I've ever worked with. Everyone that I've ever hired, everyone that I was ever asked to manage, I truly have liked them. And sometimes they're just not always great employees. So I always try and look for resolution before confrontation, and that's just my nature.
I like
So
that phrase. Let's repeat that phrase. Resolution before confrontation. That's a powerful
I always
phrase.
try and look to solve problems before there's a confrontation and try and solve them early. For example, I had one employee that just, in the type of work that we do, it's really for extroverts, and you have to be on the phones and you have to meet people and talk to people. And it just was not her thing. I mean, it was painful for her. So we kind of came to the resolution that I wasn't going to always ask her to do that all the time. She needed to do some of it, but then I said, well, what can you do to add to the team's success? And she wanted to focus more on research. She wanted to focus more on trying to help us get better organized. And I let her sit in that role, and she thrived in that role. She helped make the organization better. And then at a certain point, she realized, that enough was enough for her there. She's done all she could do. And then she moved on. So for me, I felt like that was a success.
Oh, absolutely.
I coached her up on it, and I gave her an opportunity to stay. I gave her an opportunity to work on the things that she was good at. And for me, where that comes from is, some of the great coaches that I've played for, I just appreciate them so much. I was never really a big, powerful, football player. I was fast and I was adequate in strength, but my coaches never really put me in situations where I would fail. So I try not to do that to the people that I manage.
And that is powerful, because what you just illustrated there, if anybody's ever read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, in that book, he talks about first who, then what, and getting the right people with the right vision, mindset, and all of that. But sometimes they're not in the right seats, or in a football analogy, in the right position. They have to move. Now, I'm a big baseball fan. Cal Ripken came up at shortstop, but as he aged, he moved over to third base because his athletic ability wasn't necessarily the same as it had been. And so the power there is understanding where we can get the strengths out of everybody. And by taking somebody who may not be as you use the words, extrovert, getting that person at that point to do what they thrive in and grow. Yes, they may matriculate out, but I think it's really powerful to recognize that aspect.
Yeah.
So how do you change your leadership style when you need to? Is there anything that you do that you recognize you may need to change from your natural to something a little else while still keeping your core?
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's always opportunities to change and to grow. And I feel like I'm in that space, right now as technology has advanced. Having a social media presence and a web presence is very important. And, I'm 52 years old, so I'm just kind of, I'm on the back end of that wave, I kind of miss that. So I'm playing catch up there. but I've got some smart people on my team. And if I was the type of leader that felt like I needed to make every decision, I probably still wouldn't be in my role, because our membership changes, every year. Guys are coming, guys are going, and you still need to stay in touch with the people that you serve. So I really tried to empower my staff that was in tune to that, and certainly some of the younger people on my staff that had an ear for that sort of thing, and just a natural ability around social media to really just kind of take over the platform. And it was one of the best decisions that I've ever made. Because I don't want to worry about it, because I don't know a whole bunch about it. I'm still learning. And they get excited about it, and it's something that they can own, and they can see the value that it's added to our organization. So for me, it's always being willing to learn, and to let your staff kind of manage up, and not be afraid to hear from your staff, hey, Andre, that's a bad idea, or hey, I really think we should do it a different way. And I'm always open to that. When my team tells me that's a bad idea, I don't sulk, and there's never any retaliation. I just kind of laugh, and it's kind of like a joke amongst us when they look at me and they just say, no, Andre,
Right.
That's not a good idea. And that's okay. That's okay.
That's really good, because that shows a couple of factors of what I talk about in a lot of my workshops. Is A, it shows your vulnerability. It shows that you're open to that. And that builds a level of trust, so that in the future, they're okay to come back and do that again, because they know that you're not going to have a retaliation aspect to it.
Correct. Yes.
So
indeed.
has your leadership style changed from the time you got out of the league up till the current time? Has that changed at all, or has this always been your style?
No, I mean, I think it's changed. I think in the very beginning, I had this mindset where I needed to be a little more that top-down leader, because I thought that's what leadership was. So I really tried to kind of, force that a little bit. And you can end up making some mistakes, with your team. They resent you a little bit. They're not always willing to follow you. And those mistakes, I learned, at the hospital along the way, managing a big group, so that when I did get to the NFLPA, my style was already starting to change. It was back into sports, something that I knew a lot about, and the people that I was serving, we had something in common. So I think I was able to fall back a little bit more to my natural style. But you still had to learn some things. I was still young in the workforce. I still had to understand governance and those things. And I think when you're talking about governance, there should always be a little bit more of a top-down approach, because at the end of the day, that's on me if something blows up.
Right.
Certainly dealing with people, I'm able to use my teaming style more. But for the governance, I definitely try and stay a little more focused. So I've kind of blended two styles where
Exactly.
the different levels of importance kind of come into play.
Yeah, Ken Blanchard used to talk about that more as a situational leadership. Whatever the situation is, you adapt to that particular style. And Ken Blanchard, of course, wrote a great book that I was happened to enjoy the audio version. Now, the book is old enough that I listened to it on audio tape, not even an audio CD, much less an MP3 file or on Audible. But he co-wrote the book with a gentleman we just lost recently, Don Shula, about how everyone's a coach. And he would take analogies from football and put them into business, and they would bounce the ideas back and forth. So is there something you learned in football specifically that you're able to use in leadership?
I think some of the things that I've learned in football is, some leaders, and, there are other leaders at the NFLPA, and there are certainly people that I have to answer to, but I watch some leaders feel like everything has to get done today. But what I've learned in football is, it's a process, it's a marathon. Sometimes you make a great play. Sometimes you make a string of horrible plays, but you just, you keep trying to get better. You keep trying to reach your goal. So one thing I always tell my team is, hey, there's always tomorrow. Like, it doesn't all have to get done today. So that kind of creates this more of a, relaxed work environment where, you know, we can't have great days every day. You know, some days you come in, you're not motivated. So I never, again, I don't want to hold that against them or retaliate if they're having a tough day, because there's always tomorrow. And I think, you know, I think the other thing is that in sports, you know, you have to count on the person next to you. And I've always tried to create that sort of environment for my team that, you know, you can believe in the person next to you and try and count on that person when the going gets tough. And whenever we're working on big projects, whenever we have board meetings coming up, I'm always like, hey, all hands on deck. That means everybody rolls up their sleeves, you know, gets into that workroom and does what we need to do to have a successful meeting. So.
And then with your leadership style, there's a willingness to want to do that. And that's absolutely key versus saying we have to do this. There's a whole different mindset.
Right, right.
In the last several months, we've been dealing with the COVID-19 and the stay-at-home policies. How have you adapted? How has your team adapted to everything in that situation?
I mean, because we're service oriented, you know, I don't want to say it was an easy transition, but you know, we have the proper phone systems that allow us to still work and, you know, kind of get our jobs done. You know, we've done a few things that kind of keep us connected. We have a weekly call in, you know, with just our core team, where we actually, you know, can see each other's faces. You know, we make fun of each other a little bit. And, you know, if someone doesn't have their camera on, we say, we don't care what you look like, you know, because I'm never really going to be dressed up either. You know, we're wearing baseball hats. So it's relaxed, but I want to be able to see their faces, and I want to be able to, you know, look them in the eye as best I can and communicate with them on, you know, what some of our goals are. You know, I feel like in this COVID-19 scenario, we've kind of streamlined our business to really just focus on the core of what we do. And I think the team has responded well to that. We've created a spreadsheet that we all can see and kind of track our daily activities. So we've done some things that we don't normally do in the office. We've done some things in this COVID-19 situation that still kind of pulls us together and kind of forces us to kind of take a look and focus on each other.
And that's really key, because a lot of companies are struggling because now everybody's remote. They don't know how to bring them together. And so doing that, in that process, have you developed new processes that even post COVID-19 you might be able to use?
Absolutely. I mean, I think now, working from home in this situation and working with my team, I realize, you know, what are the most important things. So, you know, I've created this checklist over the last couple of months. You know, as I stumble down into the basement, that's where they have me working. You know, I kind of stumble down into the basement and kind of start to go through this checklist. And I think that checklist will be with me for the rest of my career at the NFLPA. There's 6 or 8 things every day that you need to log on and take a look at. And when I was working in the office, you know, because someone might stop you on your way to your desk, someone might want to ask you about a situation that happened, you know, a month ago, you don't always focus on that checklist, but that's going to be one thing that I always do. I'm always going to get in, I'm going to check those 6 or 8 things to make sure that my day is moving in the right direction. And the spreadsheet that we created to kind of keep an eye on each other, that has been so valuable, and everyone logs into it. And for me, I don't really care, you know, how often you're on this spreadsheet or not. I just care at the end of the day if the job is getting done. But it is a nice way to see that, hey, we're all active and we're all doing our part. So I don't think the spreadsheet will ever leave as well, because you actually have to physically go in and type a few things in. So.
Right. Do you notice, though, that some people may be working really early in the morning and some people may be working really late at night on that? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, and I have, and typically I'm not an early riser, even in our regular work situation. I don't get to the office before 9 o'clock. You know, that's kind of my time to get in. I have one that comes in at 7. You know, I have another, because of the nature of his work, sometimes he likes to work at night and he may come in at 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never really cared much about that, as long as the job's getting done.
Exactly. There's the key
And
factor.
generally speaking, I think we're all up generally in the same hour as we work from home. But I know I try and knock off a little earlier than some of them. Some of them stay on a little later. I might get a text message or an email, at 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like, hey, that's fine. But sometimes I have to tell them, all right, that's enough. That's enough for today. We always have tomorrow. So.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely key. I was actually watching a video from a colleague of mine the other day, and he was talking about this too shall pass, and tomorrow will come. That type of situation. Let's do it. Let's have our goals for the day, your checklist, if you will, and get through that. As we get ready to close, I want to ask you a question. One of the thoughts that came up to mind as we were talking a little before we got on the recording portion here was Coach Joe Gibbs, and you mentioned him a little earlier as well. He was, or is, the only coach to have won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. And you were fortunate enough, I believe, to play on one of those teams.
Correct.
So what was it about him? How was he able to do that? Other coaches have won multiple Super Bowls, but they've had a core group. How did this all work for him?
Yeah, and I still scratch my head sometimes at what he was able to accomplish with so many different types of people. But I think, I think he was authentic. He was truly an authentic man. He believed in what he believed in, and he was never going to waver from that. He had a tremendous respect for us as people, whereas some coaches, don't always care so much about their players, but he had a tremendous respect for us and was genuinely interested in who we were and the lives that we were living. And, if we were willing to listen, he certainly was willing to, to share some of his own vulnerabilities. But I think, his greatest accomplishment was being able to get wonderfully talented players, superstar players that would have shined brightly on any team to kind of sacrifice their own personal success for the team's success. And one thing about those Redskins teams, everyone had a job to do, and everyone knew their job, and everyone did their job really well. Brian Mitchell wasn't going to do my job. I wasn't going to do Sidney Johnson's job. Monty Coleman wasn't going to do Kirk Gavea's job. We all had a job to do, and we knew exactly what we were supposed to do for that team. So when our number was called, we went in. There was no confusion. There was no misconception about what your role and what your responsibilities were. And I think making that clear, and that certainly translates to business, but making that clear for us as players just really allowed us to stay sharp, stay focused. And, man, we were a killing machine out there, the Redskins during those years.
Oh, absolutely. That was the strength in that. And what's beautiful to understand is how you get that to translate into business today. Because today we've got so many people in the little cat fights in the office saying, she's not doing her job. He's not doing this. They're not doing this. And if we all understand our own jobs, we're all part of that cogwheel, like an old-fashioned watch, if you will. Yeah. And once we start to understand that comes the strength. And I think that may be some of the places from Coach Gibbs, how you got your style and how you're leading that way, because you seem very, very genuine in the way you do it. And that is so powerful. You've got to be authentic.
And the other thing, if I can just add on to that, one last thing was that even though, the guy playing on special teams may not seem to be as glamorous as the quarterback to the public's eye, in our locker room, what he did was just as valuable as what the quarterback did. And Coach Gibbs always honored everyone on the team, really in the same way. So, your job, what you did for the team was so important to him. And there was no difference between the guy that was covering kicks versus the quarterback, calling the plays in the huddle. Everyone was important to Coach Gibbs.
And that's powerful. And motivating people and being able to do that and carrying that forward into businesses and recognizing everybody on a team in the business environment, whether it's at the NFL Players Association or on an assembly line in a manufacturing plant. It's always about getting everybody engaged and keeping them focused and motivated.
Yeah. And I really, again, I really like all the people that I've ever worked with. And I know, when I get a young star and you can just tell, they just have this twinkle in their eye and they're just thinking about things in such a different way. You realize right away, you're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to keep this one forever. But you teach them what you can. You try and develop them, but you also know that one day they're going to leave, and you should be excited for them when they do move on to a bigger opportunity. So, I've had some of those, and, it feels good to watch them have success.
Absolutely. Helping them grow and move beyond you is powerful, because we try to hold them back. That's just going to hurt the team as a whole in itself.
Yeah.
Andre Collins, I appreciate the time here today on the Teamwork Advantage. We're going to be back again next week with new and powerful information for you here about teamwork, leadership, and organizational culture. Once again, Andre, thanks for joining us here on this episode, and we wish you to have a great day, because we always say having a good day is only being average. Take care.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Teamwork Advantage with Greg Gregory. Be sure to like, subscribe, and activate the bell icon to be notified of future episodes. To learn more about how Greg can help your organization develop a powerful winning culture, visit TeamsRock.com. That's TeamsRock.com.